of World Crisis Radio. This is your host, Webster Tarpley, speaking from Washington, D.C. Right now, it's the afternoon of Friday, December 21st, 2018. And this is our Christmas show, and we will have some appropriate elements for the season, right? What's the combination? Well, you want to have something from the Christmas story and something from this issue of charity, which is so widely trampled upon by the Trump regime. So we'll try to do, well, not justice, but we'll at least nod as much as we can in the direction of those. Now, let me just preface everything with the existence of yet another stock market crash today. Markets continue to crash. All of the excesses of the Trump regime are coming home to roost. The chickens are coming home to roost. And that is the thing that is going to end the Trump regime, leading to his ouster. As we have talked about, the ouster of Nixon was not complete until he had shown absolute economic incompetence. And that's what we're seeing now. Every 1,000 points the Dow goes down, that is where, another legion of enemies for Trump is recruited, even inside the Wall Street financier oligarchy. So that's going on now, right? Right now it's down about 336 points. We have now declined 2,000 Dow points since last Friday. This is a crash. It's proceeding more like a mudslide than a thunderclap, but that is the way some crashes come about. So once again, we have a great deal of tension in our show today. On the one hand, we have to evoke chaos, pandemonium, DEFCON 2, as some have called it, right? Just short of all-out hostilities as a result of the crisis of the Trump regime. In other words, it's a crisis in the real world, to be sure, but then magnified and distorted beyond all grotesque measure in the mind of the troubled chief executive, or individual one, as we're calling him these days. And that then, as he lashes out in his typical attempts to save himself, right, from the fate that is obviously now approaching on several fronts, that then generates the chaos and turbulence in the real world. So let's just preface it. First of all, a good quote from Thomas Paine in the December of 1776, right after the American Revolution had been put into motion. We have Thomas Paine saying, "These are the times that try men's souls. The summer soldier and the sunshine patriot will, in this crisis, shrink from the service of their country, but he that stands by it now deserves the love and thanks of man and woman. Tyranny, like hell, is not easily conquered, yet we have this coalition, this consolation with us, that the harder the conflict, the more glorious the triumph. What we obtain too cheap, we esteem too lightly. It is dearness only that gives everything its value. Heaven knows how to put a proper price upon its goods, and it would be strange indeed if so celestial an article as freedom should not be highly rated." So it's a wonderful festive season, in spite of everything, but we're now heading into a year that will probably mark the final political battles of the Trump regime. In other words, the ouster of Trump during 2019. That is our overwhelming impression. And giant steps towards the extinction of the Republican Party here in the United States as a national political force. There will still be a Republican Party a year from now, but we hope it will be well on its way to the status of a kind of regional splinter party, once again for racists, bigots, reactionaries, warmongers, and so forth in the Deep South, in rural America, in the Intermountain West, and so forth, but without the ability to block the Congress and to control the presidency. So that's our hope. Fondly do we hope and fervently do we pray for that. The end of the long national nightmare is clearly visible, at least on the horizon, and therefore it is the responsibility of every person of goodwill around the world to work towards that end. Now, within this, we have a national security emergency, which we will explain in some detail. That is to say, the ouster of Defense Secretary Mattis, driven out in a general way, even if he chose the exact moment of his resignation, and I'm not even convinced. And then the rout of the United States, the precipitous withdrawal, the disarray, leaving Syria. And what we care about in Syria is the slaughter of the Kurds. One of our themes is the new Herod. Herod, of course, king of Judea back at the time of the Christmas story. We're going to get back to that in some detail, but one of the slaughters of the innocents that are now on the horizon is the tragic fate that awaits the Kurds unless some of this stuff can be stopped. And even in Afghanistan, it's not as simple as Trump seems to think. What can we say? Lo, the beloved country reduced to getting jerked around at the caprice of a madman who is avidly gaslighting and faking and maneuvering from one week to the next. Now, some would say we're in the realm of chaos and delirium, the end of the world practically. However, there is a clear pattern in this. The method in the madness is wrecking of the national and free world values and appeasement. Appeasement and betrayal. And for the 80th anniversary of Munich, the Munich sellout of September 1938, well, we've gone through it, and we have given you the inevitability that appeasement at least vastly increased the danger of a new world war. So in the current case, the appeasement included the attempt to blow up the G7 summit, the NATO summit, and so forth. And we're obviously not in possession of any specific individual information, but the story of the Moscow Tower, Trump Tower Moscow, and the related narratives that have come out would seem to indicate a vast potential for blackmail and for extortion. So this is where we are now. It is, even in this case, right, there's a kind of a two-sided aspect. On the one side, world historically seen, the November election marks a turning point, both in the United States and in Britain. However, as Paine says, tyranny like hell is not easily conquered. We'll be back in a minute on World Crisis. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Topley here in Washington, D.C. It's the afternoon of December 21st, 2018. We're watching the stock market crashing. We're now down to about minus 379, 380 on the Dow. The losses are accelerating. And on the other hand, we've also got the question of the government shutdown. Right? The Senate is forced to wait, we're told. In order to get a quorum, you've got to have a certain number of senators, and a lot of them had concluded that their work for the year was done, that they had passed, remember, by voice vote a couple of days ago, the package of funding to keep the government going, and that was pushing the funding into February, when, of course, the House of Representatives would be under Democratic domination, and therefore they left town. And now some of them are having to come back from very remote areas. Some of them are coming, I think at least one senator has to come back from Hawaii. So not all the Democratic or not even the Republican senators are going to be back by this afternoon. Some of them will only get here in the evening, and then there will be at least a pro forma attempt to come up with a budget that Trump can sign. But it's likely that we will go into a government shutdown. Terrible thing. Trump is already saying there will be a shutdown. Remember a couple of days ago he said to Chuck and Nancy, I'll own this. I will take responsibility. I won't blame it on you. Well, sure enough, he's blaming it on them. The shutdown is up to the Democrats, right? Republicans control White House, Senate, House, Supreme Court. They control everything. They don't control the mayor of Washington, D.C., I guess, but other than that, they control everything in sight around here. They've even got the governor of Maryland. So what this is showing us is the Republican Party cannot govern. It cannot govern. It is systemically, constitutionally, structurally incapable of guiding the progress of a great nation. And this is why there is no excuse for the continued existence of this obscene, odious, grotesque Republican Party. We don't want bipartisan deals with them. We want them to depart from the historical stage. The path is clear. It has been trodden by the Federalists in the early 19th century, 1820 to 1830. It was then trodden by the Whig Party, the anti-Jackson Party in the early 1850s, and then in a very brief episode, trodden by the Know-Nothings, who were really around for 1852, 54, 56, and by then they were basically gone. So this is, I think, somewhat similar. The Know-Nothings of then are the equivalent of the populists or fascisto-populists of today, and their rise is meteoric and their fall is equally meteoric, and that's what we're living through. The problem, of course, is that the Know-Nothings never controlled the White House, and unfortunately, under these conditions, we've got a demagogue, a pseudo-populist demagogue in the White House. He is tormented by God knows what dreams. He is perhaps tormented by memories of how he got into power. I'm thinking in the Shakespearean canon, it's probably Macbeth. It doesn't have to be the crimes that were committed by Macbeth, but various crimes, financial crimes, certainly can come back to haunt the dreams of an illegitimate holder of power. Trump is also tormented by the collapse of his public image. That has been very acute this week. This is actually one of the root causes of his irrational behavior. We know his favorite television program is Fox and Friends. The contents of Fox and Friends is, of course, dictated by foreigners. By Rupert Murdoch. Don't tell me he has citizenship. I don't care. He's from Australia. He's in London. This character is a British United Empire loyalist, I guess is the word. There's no room for the United States in that equation. But those foreign influences, and God knows what what means people have of getting content on there if they want to. It's like advertising, right? You get paid to put advertising on. Who knows how you get your cause perorated on the Fox and Friends in the Morning. Anyway, Ducey, the former weatherman here in Washington, D.C., some decades ago, right? No background, not news, not finance, not anything, not even weather, came and said, why, Trump is looking like a loser on the wall. And he's then been mocked as having to change the title of his book from The Art of the Deal to The Art of the No Deal. No deal. And remember, you had all of these historical precedents, right? You had the square deal, the fair deal, the New Deal, across various presidencies. And with Trump, you're actually getting the no deal, the government shut down. And, of course, some have said that the failure of Trump to extract this idiotic wall, this fetish that he has, because, of course, his backward followers, it's a tangible thing. It's like a totem. It is not a concept. It's not even a spiritual idea, but it's simply a fetish, a totem. So this is now his moment. It is Trump's read my lips, no new taxes moment. He said, read my lips, we're building a wall and Mexico will pay. The last part of that has already fallen away. Will there be a wall? He is desperately clinging, bitterly clinging to this notion of a wall. So we can say that the mentality in the White House, with a tailspin going on, has been dominated by wall and wall, by border wall and by Wall Street. Border wall that he's desperately seeking money to build, and Wall Street crash, which has been going on. And that, I think, is the root of this stuff. This is an indication, in some ways, of the primacy of domestic politics, right? The old Arno Mayer thesis that I heard at Princeton a long time ago. But Arno Mayer, I think he's still around. We hope he is. Season's greetings to him. But the primacy of domestic politics is what we're seeing. And even the primacy of psychodrama. Back in a minute on World Show. We invite you, of course, to visit... We'll follow the click on the various links that you see on topley.net, or go directly to The American System. That's americansystem.tv, americansystem.tv, to beguile the time if you have some time off during the Christmas period, right? Between the years, between Christmas and New Year's. Join the podcast. Join our podcast. It's called The American System. It happens every day, Monday through Thursday. You should be a part of this. It's indispensable. The wealth of material of what's going on right now is beyond the ability of our 80 minutes of programming here on Saturday. Try as we will. And of course, the Dow is crashing down further, down now 422 points. That's 1.85%. Down. So, in the middle of this existential crisis or psychological fit, Trump is lashing out. Now, he has chosen to make things impossible for Mattis. I say, in effect, he has driven Mattis out of office by ignoring his advice. Originally, Mattis was able to convince Trump to avoid certain things. Let's just cite one of them. There was a moment where Trump wanted to unilaterally abort the U.S. membership in NATO. In other words, cut loose Europe. God, this takes us back to Henry Cabot Lodge and the isolationists of 1919. They were rightly horrified by Woodrow Wilson and his hypocrisy. in the service of the British Empire, because that's what it was. But they then decided, we want no part of the League of Nations. It's no good. The reward for that was World War II, Hitler, Mussolini, World War II, Cold War, communism, fascism, everything grows out of this terrible decision. So Trump says, yes, let's revisit that. Let's go back to the world pre-1914. That's what Putin wants, isn't it? Yes, it is. International anarchy, no alliances, dog eat dog, the war of every country against every other country. And violent, not just in the realm of economics or the struggle for ideas. No, violent. So Trump wanted to pull out of NATO, and he was restrained by Mattis. Mattis was seconded by Pompeo, Pomposo, as we call him here, and Bolton. But the decisive voice was Mattis, older man, general, warrior, so forth. So that was important. Then there was this other moment, which is documented by Woodward in his book, that at one point Trump wanted to pull the U.S. dependence out of South Korea, despite the fact that this would probably have been interpreted by the Kim regime, the regime of Madman Kim in North Korea, as the preparation for an immediate sneak attack on him. So Mattis has been able to avoid a certain amount of misery for humanity, and therefore his departure increases our danger. Now, who might replace Mattis? We're told General Keane. General Keane was once the Deputy Chief of Staff of the U.S. Army. He is, I guess he's a pretty determined neocon. He works, or has worked at least, with the Institute for the Study of War, and Kim Kagan and her husband, I guess, there too. However, Keane has already said that he condemns the precipitous, routed pullout, right? The cut and run. Cut and run. That was a famous Nixonian saying, and even under Johnson, right? You can't cut and run. Well, in this case, it really is cut and run. We'll do the details on Syria in a minute. So Keane is a possibility. Cotton, one of the greatest villains in the entire U.S. Congress is this character Cotton. He probably is the most reactionary of all the Republican senators. He is xenophobic. He is jingoist. In this latest round of prison reform, he was the most strident voice saying, no, if you let people out of jail who are being crushed by these de facto life sentences, that endangers public safety. Not him, but Trump might like him. His stock and trade is cruelty. The one hope is that Cotton, looking at this sinking ship of Trump, will essentially say, no, I can't tie my future to that. Lindsey Graham of South Carolina, quite possible, although here too, he doesn't want to be the vehicle for a rout. He doesn't want to get caught up in the rout. He doesn't want to join the rout. And then one of our old enemies here, General Petraeus, right, who would have a hard time getting confirmed because of his sharing of the state secrets with his then mistress a couple of years ago. So the Atlantic Monthly tells us those four. Those are all terrible choices. Maybe there won't be a Secretary of Defense here for quite a while. Trump should have thought of that before he humiliated Mattis. Now, as we said, the Senate is attempting to come up with something, at least to have a vote on what has now arrived from the House. Right? Yesterday, the House voted the existing package of funding plus $5.7 billion, I believe, for the wall, which the Democrats are determined not to vote for. So we'll soon see whether this can get through. Chances are, of course, it cannot. Now, in the meantime, Trump is demanding the nuclear option. He says, make the Senate into the same railroad operation as the House. Simple majority on everything. No supermajorities, no rules that specify 60 votes or anything of the sort. The Emperor Trump demands that these senators, right, you work hard to get into the Senate because if it's a 60-vote threshold under certain circumstances, at least for money bills and things like this, then you can have some power. But if you're just another hand raiser, right? We have a graphic comment from a member of the House saying, you know, what the life in Congress under Trump is to sit around and wait for the tweets to come in telling you what to think, how to vote, what to do, and so forth. So the word is that Mitch McConnell doesn't want to do it because he'll be debasing the coin that his members have fought for. We are told, it's interesting, that 6 of 7 bills, now remember, they start with 12 appropriation bills. 5 of them, I believe, or more, have been passed. Those have been signed by Trump. So those agencies will continue. There are 7 bills, 7 agencies, and so forth that have not yet been passed. 6 of those are ready to go. You could pass those 2, and that would then leave only the Department of Homeland Security, right, the locus of the wall money. But it's not likely that Trump would sign those because that would take away his leverage, right? He is in effect blackmailing and extorting the American people with this crazy demand. Bottom line, dear friends, this is anarchy. The anarchists, Trump and the Republicans, cannot govern. They need to be expelled, essentially, from Washington, D.C. by the voters. We'll be back in a minute. Back to World Crisis Radio. This is Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. once again. Now, if you shut down the government, there are still about 750,000 workers who will not get their checks. This includes people he claims to care about. It includes air traffic controllers, overworked in the holiday season. It includes the personnel of Customs and Border Protection and ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, and all the rest of it. They will go without paychecks. Now, in theory, they'll get that money reimbursed to them later on, maybe, if they're lucky. But Trump is whining. We need border security. We have no barriers, human trafficking. It's the simple strategy of scapegoating, and this is the sad lesson of Germany in the 1930s. If you're in a depression, you can scapegoat some ethnic group, try to blame it all on them. Of course, it doesn't solve anything, and it leads you down the path towards monstrous crimes, as illustrated in the Nuremberg Tribunal of 1945 to 1946. So Trump says illegal immigration costs the U.S. $285 billion a year. Yeah, but what about the other side? What's the upside of immigration of all sorts? He claims the wall would pay for itself every month. Anyway, these are all crazy theories, right? This is all spin that I think he makes up himself, right? These are lines that occur to the mind of a salesman. So how did we get here? It's very interesting. His faithful base is not so faithful. Notice that the Republican Senate had voted against him on the Khashoggi issue. They wanted Saudi Arabia branded as the guilty party, and a lot of them even wanted Mohammed bin Salman to be indicated as the perpetrator. So that was already a shaking of this blind, dog-like, bootlicking loyalty. Well, now we've got a kind of a rebellion. This is coming not so much from the Congress or the Senate, no, not at all, but from the various demagogues of the media. Well, from the Congress we have Jim Jordan and Mark Meadows saying we have to have the wall. Very big role for Ann Coulter, who had already broken with Trump before, but now she's back again saying this is a gutless president in a wall-less country. Laura Ingraham, another reactionary from, I think, the Dartmouth Review. That's the matrix for a lot of these people. It's kind of the social milieu of Kavanaugh as well. So there's Ingraham. She's vehement and outspoken. Hannity had the week off, I think, and he's been replaced by various guest hosts, but he seems to have joined in. And Limbaugh, right? Limbaugh saying that we've got to have the wall, the wall, the wall, the wall. Well, probably a good time to defeat these people, right? Teach them a lesson. When the Congress changes hands, I'm thinking of 1987, early in the year, the Democrats in that period went out of their way to teach the Republicans a lesson, saying, look, there's a new majority here, deal with it, live with it, you're not calling the shots anymore. So the Republican Party simply cannot govern. And now, what does it mean, of course, if you're shutting down the government and these families are going to be in distress? I would also add, the Republicans tried to get workfare, slave labor, forced labor in order to get food. They wanted that built into the food stamp program, SNAP, Supplemental Nutrition Program, right? And they didn't succeed in getting into the Farm Bill, which Trump signed yesterday. But the Trump administration is trying to do this on their own. They have now promulgated rules, guidelines, regulations. They're supposed to be against those, but they did it in this case when it comes to ripping off poor people. Yeah, they did it, and this is going to be 750,000 here as well. 750,000 food stamp beneficiaries are going to be in crisis if they can't find some kind of a job. Well, the secret is there are no jobs, but Trump doesn't care about that, and therefore they're doing it, right? So, Merry Christmas from the Trump administration. If you're part of the working poor, right? A lot of these people have jobs and they need the food stamps, and they're going to have to go through at least a certain period of administrative delay. You can get pretty hungry. Now this takes us back to Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol, back in those years of primitive accumulation and the poor law and so forth. Remember that it's Christmas Eve. Scrooge is in his office, and two gentlemen come in. They're attempting to do a work of charity, and they say to him, at this festive season of the year, Mr. Scrooge, it is more than usually desirable that we should make some slight provision for the poor and destitute who suffer greatly at the present time. Many thousands are in want of common necessities. Hundreds of thousands are in want of common comforts, amenities. Sir, are there no prisons, says Scrooge? Plenty of prisons. How about the union workhouses? Are they still going? They are. Still, I wish I could say they were not. The treadmill, literally a treadmill, and the poor law are in full vigor then, says Scrooge. Both very busy. Well, I'm glad they're still going, but attempting again. The charity guys say, under the impression that they scarcely furnish Christian cheer of mind or body to the multitude, says the philanthropist. A few of us are endeavoring to raise a fund to buy the poor some meat and drink and means of warmth. We choose this time because it is at this time of all others when want is keenly felt and abundance rejoices. What shall I put you down for? And of course the answer is nothing. And this is the famous Malthusian quote from Scrooge: if they'd rather die than go to the poorhouse, if they would rather die, they had better do it and decrease the surplus population. And besides, excuse me, I don't know that. In other words, I don't know. This is so common. Sound familiar? Yeah, it may be, but I can't tell. I'm not sure that what you're saying is so. That's the negation of charity coming from Ebenezer Scrooge, right? And this is the classic situation. So where do you think Trump comes down in that, right? This regime, right? The Trumps, the Millers, the others, the Steve Hiltons on Fox News, they all say, yeah, we care about the working men. We've got one guy who even has the Republican Party is now the party of the working class, right? Several years ago, they denied there was a working class. Now they come forward and say, we speak for the working class, right? These decadent billionaires, right, in their gilded cages. Well, no. So we'll even get back to the charity question here towards the end. But now the current situation here, the stock market had been down 470 points or so. Right now, the stock market is down 414 points, 1.81%. This is the worst week in 10 years. Once again, it is 2,000 points being lost. 10 years means back to the world derivatives panic. And I would point to a couple of interesting opinions. Yellen says this is the fruits of deregulation. You wipe out banking regulation. You wipe out Consumer Finance Protection Bureau. You get a crash. And sure enough, we're in the middle of it. We're in the thick of a crash. On the scale, perhaps, of 2008. How about that? Vote Republican all the way. Back in a minute. The second hour now of World Crisis Radio. This is Webster Topley in Washington, D.C., Friday, the 21st of December. Here in the late afternoon, we've got a stock market crash going on. It's now down, minus 414 or 1.81%. And that's the close. So the day has come to an end. And again, minus 2,000 points in 1 week. Isn't that great? That's the mastery of Trump. The great businessman. You were told the businessman will know how to run the government. Well, don't buy that garbage again as long as you live, or you will be terminally cretinous in your outlook. So, businessmen don't know how to run governments. That is for sure. Others may not know how to run governments, but businessmen are generally the last of all. And we've seen it also in the macro realm with Trump. We've seen it in the failed management of Tillerson, great businessman, and actually a real businessman, but also complete failure at the State Department, because all they can think about is cost-cutting, profits, and so forth, whereas the purpose of government is the general welfare, the common defense, the benefits of a more perfect union, ourselves and our posterity. How do you quantify that? There's no dollar sign on that. Remember the polemic of the great Franklin D. Roosevelt in December 1940 after winning that critical third term. And he said, let's get rid of that mean, stupid old dollar sign, because sometimes you actually have to. What is peace worth? Peace is priceless. It's precious. So the market has closed minus 414 on the Dow. Whoa, the S&P 500, 2416, down 2%. NASDAQ down 3%. NASDAQ is in bear land. Not the three bears, but more bears. And what else have we got? Oil is now at 45.45. Whoo, down 1%. Even gold not managing to gain under these circumstances, which is a bit of a surprise. So there we go. Now, putting all this together, I would propose For people of goodwill, here is the project that we can and should try to implement in the early months of 2019. This is, if you will, our suggestions on activism, our marching orders, if you want, but maybe that's too authoritarian for the current time. It's our urgent suggestion how to do good for people of goodwill. Now, the new Mexican president, and this is a classic, we now have Andrés Manuel López Obrador, known as AMLO. The Mexican president is AMLO. We'll be talking about him as AMLO in our broadcasts, in our headlines, because we're going to have a lot to say about this guy, because he started off on a very good note. He has proposed to Trump a Marshall Plan for this area of Central America and I think southern Mexico, the sort of Chiapas area, and perhaps some other of those Mexican federal states. So Andrés Manuel López Obrador, AMLO, is proposing a $30 billion program as a Marshall Plan for Central America over 5 years. Now, don't quibble with the amounts. The amounts are too low. The time frame is too long. That's okay. You get this up, you can fill it with greater content as time goes on. But this is the kind of thing that used to happen in the world, right? Going back to the Mexican president López Portillo, probably more than 30 years ago, right? These are programs to alleviate social conditions, minimize the debt burden, haircuts for the investors, the creditors in many cases. But in this case, it's simply a development program, a new Marshall Plan. $30 billion over 5 years in job-creating economic development assistance. There are few details available. This AMLO, López Obrador, became president of Mexico on December 1st, and right off the bat, he has chosen this important theme. He wants to minimize friction with the United States, right? Don't get into a situation where the people from Guatemala, Honduras, and Salvador are traversing the Mexican territory with the problems that creates, and then entering the United States, so it looks from the U.S. point of view for an empiricist dunce like Trump saying, oh, you're letting them through. Well, here is a very constructive proposal that seems to have received at least some support from people in the Trump camp, right, in the Trump entourage. Now, you can find this an influential article on this is the Washington Post of December 15th. Mexico has a plan to reduce the migrant flow from Central America. Trump should embrace it. Now, because with Trump, this changes as often as the weather. He's notoriously mercurial, as we have to say, but still, This is an editorial in the Washington Post on December 16th. This would be a very good thing. Remember that Trump had been talking about ending all existing aid to Central America. Shut down the border, stop giving any kind of aid to Central American countries, and simply leave this place to become a hellhole. Now, López Obrador, clever politician, pointed out to Trump, you don't have to do this, but if you don't do it, I'm turning to the Chinese. So how would you like that, Trump, that your heritage is the Red Chinese, the Chi-Coms, the Communist Chinese on the Rio Grande? Is that what you wanted? That's a wonderful outcome. That's really making America great again, you moron. So, in this case, it looks like, again, Trump seems to be positive. They didn't reject it. As the Washington Post writes, the start of a beautiful friendship, or at least a constructive alliance, between a pair of populist presidents who are ideological opposites, right? AMLO left, Trump extreme right, to put it mildly. So this is to the benefit of both countries. Hundreds of miles of existing barriers at the border have not stopped the flow of migrants, and neither will Trump's wall. Now, here's the big thing that we want to add to this. Who's going to pay for this? You're going to tax American working people, or for that matter, Mexican working people, to get this money, the $30 billion? No. We demand, especially now in an atmosphere where Trump is steadily attacking the Federal Reserve. Trump is attacking the Federal Reserve for all the wrong reasons, or at least a lot of the wrong reasons, and mainly because his intent is ill. Trump wants to stoke a speculative bubble, prop it up, keep it inflated. No, that is not the way to do it. The way to do it is to start using credit creation for real production, for job creation. And, of course, nothing could be more dramatic than the humanitarian plight of tens of thousands of destitute, desperate refugees crowding up against the U.S. border. How much better if these people could be given employment and a future in their own countries. But in order to do this, it's got to be financed at 0% by the Federal Reserve. You want to beat up Powell at the Federal Reserve, Trump? Call him up and tell him thank you for your offer to provide $30 billion for this program, stabilize the southern border, if you think that is the big existential issue. Of course, for many it is. So will AMLO, López Obrador, Mexican president, invite him to Washington right now, arrange for an exchange visit? The U.S. president, whoever it is, goes to Mexico City and announce a Marshall Plan for Central America and southern Mexico. I'm sure there are countries in Latin America that would like to join this. They don't really want the Chinese and their debt trap, their Belt and Road imperialism, essentially a new version of the British Empire with greater rhetorical hypocrisy than the British ever had. A lot of people would like to join this, so get ready to expand it. But in order to make this economically viable, 0% interest. Get the interest rate, right? It used to be the dollar sign. Right now it is the interest rates. Beat up Powell. Force him to provide 0%. And you can do that with a phone call. You can do that with a bill, a law. If it's a law passed in Congress, there's no way that Powell could weasel out of that one. The Federal Reserve people believe that they are there to serve banks. Of the banks, by the banks, for the banks. We say no. General welfare, common defense, and the other objectives of government that are detailed in the preamble. That's your goal. And that often means not serving the whims of Wall Street. We saw this past week. Wall Street wanted no interest rate increase. If anything, Wall Street wanted a cut in interest rates. They did not get what they wanted for technical reasons and pedantry and concerned about the so-called independence of the Federal Reserve. Well, we cannot afford the luxury of an independent Federal Reserve when that means that they are toadies and lackeys for Wall Street financier oligarchs, zombie bankers, hedge fund hyenas, stock jobbers, speculators, and all the rest, right? And these people have now just about got us back to 2008. The big danger for the coming year, for 2019, is debt, highly leveraged debt. Debt based on debt. In other words, collateralized loan obligations. You remember the destruction done by the collateralized the CDOs, right? Collateralized debt obligations then. Now it's collateralized loan obligations, and these are even worse. You've gone from an atomic bomb to a hydrogen bomb, in effect. And as many have pointed out, that's going to be the classic Trump bubble is a stock bubble combined with a debt bubble. Highly leveraged based on debt. He's the king of debt, right? He always did very well with debt, as he has told us so many times. The Federal Reserve should provide credit for infrastructure, for production. They should not make the banking community the be-all and end-all of what they do. You do need a banking system, but not with these derivatives, not with all the kinds of speculative, cancerous kinds of phenomena that we've been seeing. So take this advantage. And, of course, once again, the humanitarian side is tremendous. In other words, why should this young girl die, right? Obviously, she should not die. The 7-year-old girl from Guatemala died in Border Patrol custody. This should not happen. This is unworthy. This is a monstrosity. This gets us in the suburbs, at least, of Nuremberg, if not all the way into the city and court in Nuremberg. And let's also remember that the notion of the U.S. cooperating with countries in Mexico, Central, South America, this is a long tradition. Remember Henry Clay? One of the things Henry Clay wanted to do when he was Secretary of State was to pursue what he called a good neighbor policy. And this was then taken up by Franklin D. Roosevelt. How about this? In the inaugural address, first inaugural from Roosevelt, March 4th, 1933, in the field of world policy, I would dedicate this nation to the policy of the good neighbor, the neighbor who resolutely respects himself, and because he does so, respects the rights of others, the neighbor who respects his obligations and respects the sanctity of his agreements in and with a world of neighbors. And one of the interesting aspects is the relation of Franklin D. Roosevelt to Getulio Vargas of, I believe, Brazil, who had a program of social welfare and reform similar in some ways to the New Deal. Franklin Roosevelt talked about Vargas, saying he is one of two people who invented the New Deal. Well, maybe the New Deal can be reinvented in our time with the help of Lopez Obrador, who was turning out to be a very positive surprise. So if you want a Christmas present, it's the Marshall Plan for Central America. Tax Wall Street Party will be campaigning for this. This is our big issue with the new Democratic Congress. You've got to get out there and do it. But in this, as in so many other areas, no regressive taxation. Forget about raising the gas tax. To hell with that. We want the Fed to cough up 0% credit. They were willing to provide $27 trillion of 0% credit to the international zombie banks, from the Barclays Bank to Wall Street and so forth. That's no good. We want that credit-creating power, job-creating power, power to create economic development. We want that mobilized with the help of the U.S. government. And, of course, for Trump, look, it's good politics. You want to show your base that you can beat up on the central bankers? Well, do it then. But in the quest of something positive, you will also see quite a few freakouts coming from places like NBC or even CNN when you get into that. So according to these articles, Mnuchin has been positive on this, and the U.S. has agreed to $5.8 billion to go to Central America. However, this is not new money. This is simply reclassifying, relabeling existing appropriations. And of course, the xenophobes say, "How dare you? Those people have to suffer. We can't provide anything for them." So the people who are they purport to be most freaked out about the wall and the caravans and the rest of this idiotic mythology, they are not going to be in favor of the one rational thing. Provide economic development to give people a decent life and a perspective on the future where they are. And we'll be back here in just a minute on World Crisis Radio. Back to World Crisis Radio. We have two topics left. In particular, what should happen with Afghanistan and with Syria? Now, the first thing to say is we here are not pacifists. Not. if you were a pacifist in the late 1930s, if you were the future Gold Star mothers of America, you were essentially a useful idiot for Hitler, because all Hitler wanted to do was to destroy the Western powers one by one. Couldn't do it all at once, had to take them on seriatim, one at a time. So we don't believe in pacifism, and we don't believe in cut and run in the face of Russia and China as they are today. So let's go back to this. We consider pacifism to be an aspect of the whining, sort of mushhead approach to politics. This is now a grave danger. The Democratic Party is full of people who really know nothing of the world, and all they know is war is bad. Well, yeah, war is bad. War is hell. First ones to admit it. But there are other things that can be worse, and you want to do this judiciously and as a last resort. Now, here's the complication, is during the age of neocon domination, I guess we'd have to say, that's in particular from 2000 to 2008. In other words, the Bush the younger regime, although you also had neocons in the Bush the elder regime, right? Remember, he was from Team B. He was the warmonger of those years. But just to limit this to 2000 to 2008 with Cheney, the Cheney movie coming out, right, for the holidays, this was essentially a situation where there was momentarily no existential threat to the United States. That would have been the time to build reserves, to do scientific research, engineering, modernize technologies, fix the problems of aircraft carriers and bombers and things like this, to maintain essentially an invincible defense, but not use it. Don't go attacking Iraq. Don't worry about Saddam Hussein. It is thanks to the neocons overwhelmingly that these useless wars were artificially invented, right, on false pretenses, right? Do you believe that bin Laden flew those planes into the buildings on 9/11? Well, we don't. See my book. Get it for Christmas. 9/11 Synthetic Terror, made in USA. Then on the weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, this, of course, is universally recognized as an absolute fraud. So these were bad policies, invading these countries in the service of God knows what. Some would say the industrial military complex, others would say the Israelis, and the list is long. The Saudis, of course, all come in there. Notice, Putin wanted the U.S. in Afghanistan after 2001. I went through this as part of my standard speech. He says, yeah, Americans, come into Afghanistan. I know what you're going to find there, and believe me, you won't like it, and you'll be weaker, and I'll be stronger, and I can recover my ability for aggression and for subversion and so forth, right? That was clear when that happened. He was not the friend of stupid Bush the younger. So this was very bad policy in 2001, 2003, and yet you're stuck with it. This is what you have now. The neocons have tragically weakened the United States, and we now have the three-cornered world with the Russian Federation and China, both totalitarian powers, as Secretary Mattis says. I think he says authoritarian. In the case of China, for sure it's totalitarian, and I think for Russia too. So they threw out the idea of being judicious. There's no economy of force here. So these things have continued along. They have vegetated along. They have festered. Now we are in the world of great power rivalry. In the year 2005, get out of Afghanistan, get out of Iraq. Those were good slogans. Today, utter folly, because if you get out of Syria and Afghanistan in these cases, and maybe Iraq too, the Chinese will be there with their Belt and Road imperialism. The Russians will be there with their dreams of Moscow, the third Rome, as the basis of a new imperialism. We are in the world of great power rivalries, and I've said this numerous times. Unfortunately, when you have a Cold War situation with 2 or 3 superpowers, maybe 2 against 1, dominating the world, every little local issue is going to be reinterpreted through these questions of the great power rivalry. Too bad. I didn't do it. I warned against it. I was not in favor. I rejected these notions and did whatever I could, right? The 9/11 question was to attack that meant to be an effective anti-war spokesman, not out of pacifism, but because this was the wrong thing to do all around, wrong for the regional people and wrong for the U.S. side. So now what are you going to do? You're going to simply go on. This is the big danger, is that people who have learned to spout one series of slogans keep spouting the same thing. And I've seen now Democratic senators on the air. The younger one from Connecticut, I think, is on this line, right? You cannot take your anti-Pentagon, anti-military, anti-technology backwardness into the current world. That is not the world anymore. The neocons have wrecked a lot of things, but you've got to live in the world as it is. You want to survive in today's world? It doesn't help you to go back and say, yeah, but this was wrong back 15 years ago. So there we go. It is a world of great power rivalry. It is absolute folly. It's treachery to abandon Syria. Let's look at Syria. What's important here? The U.S. generally chooses very bad allies, right? The people that the U.S. chose in Syria, extremely bad, right? Because you're choosing these jihadis, right? The crazies, the takfiris, chosen by Saudi Arabia and other reactionary Gulf monarchies. Those are very bad allies. Could not be worse. But in the middle of all that, there is one group that is worth supporting. It is the Kurds. It's the KYP Kurds, who have gallantly done the fighting. They're obviously fighting for their own national existence. There are different kinds. There's PKK inside Turkey. There's the northern Iraqi Kurds, and then the KYP Kurds. They're different. They're not the same. Don't say that this is the PKK. That is crazy. That's essentially Turkish propaganda. We have Erdogan. Trump seems to be very impressed by Erdogan because he's such a tough guy and dictator and totalitarian. And Erdogan says, if you want me to buy weapons from you, I want a kickback. He wants all sorts of things. He wants Gulen. And, of course, the whole Trump gang is in this odor of treachery because of Flynn, because this is who he was working with, for, and so forth. So the KYP Kurds, modern, enlightened, westernized, status of women, probably the best in the region as of right now, compared to these other places. So what are you going to do? Leave the Kurds so that they will be slaughtered by Turkey? This is a catastrophe. This is the U.S. branded forever as treachery. We often talk about perfide Albion, right? Over centuries, the British ruling elite, the Foreign Office, perfidious, can't trust them, devious. The U.S. is going to have that, in some ways it's already there, but it's going to be indelible. So, no, stay there. Don't be a berserker. And as for Afghanistan, you have a lot of people who want to stay there. So it's good that the British and the French say they will maintain a presence vis-a-vis Syria. And don't tell me all these old cliches about they created ISIS. Yeah, whatever it was, this is all gone. Back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. It's the last segment of our Christmas program for 2018. And we are, in spite of all this stuff, in spite of the chaos, the pandemonium, the stock market crashing, the government in chaos, the shutdown beginning, we are undaunted, and we will be here through 2019, and we will hopefully describe and report to you the end of the Trump interlude and the beginning of the end of this Republican Party, which has caused so much misery and suffering in the world. There are allegedly 30,000 ISIS fighters Trump is, of course, lying when he says that ISIS has ceased to exist. It's a lie. And we don't obviously share in the extravagant claims about what they can do, say, to the U.S., although this cannot be excluded. But the main thing is you're there with 2,000 to 3,000 troops. That is a peacekeeping force. The U.S. forces in Syria are a classic peacekeeping force, a small force that keeps different groups separated and imposes a certain code of conduct on them thanks to the U.S. air power and so forth. It is now too late in the day for this simplistic mushhead pacifism to rule current decisions, right? War hawks, empire. This was the rhetoric, sometimes interesting, sometimes idiotic, of 10, 15 years ago. Not now. The world is now much different, and you cannot go jabbering and repeating and parroting your old slogans, even though that's more comfortable than learning something new. So don't go berserk. Obviously, eventually you want to draw down some of these things, but in a very careful way. As I always said, don't pull forces out of South Korea. You may or may not start World War III, but you don't want to find out. Don't do experiments on your own body. Now, this leads us to our relevant question, the new Herod. And I do this for the sake of the people of faith, yes. And if you're going to encounter such people at the Christmas table or elsewhere, be armed with some arguments, right? And that is, the current regime is the new Herod. Herod, of course, the Roman satrap, the Roman puppet who governed the Judea area back at the time of Christ and the Christmas story. And this meshes with a number of other famous themes, right? The three magi, the three wise men, following the star of Bethlehem, according to this text. We're looking here at the Gospel according to St. Matthew, chapter 1, right at the beginning. This is the only place where some of this stuff appears. And they are looking for Christ with gold and myrrh and frankincense. They got to the palace of King Herod, and they reported on this, and he said, "Oh, please go and find him, and I will come and worship him," because he wants to kill everybody in sight. So Joseph of St. Joseph is warned in a dream, get out of town, take the baby and Mary and flee into Egypt. This is along with the Magi, the flight into Egypt. These are favorite themes, especially the flight into Egypt of the Italian Renaissance, right? Go to the Uffizi, you'll find various versions of this. So he goes into Egypt and stays there until Herod is dead. So Herod, when he saw that he was mocked by the wise men, was exceedingly wroth, exceedingly angry, and sent forth and slew all the children that were in Bethlehem and in all the coasts thereof, from 2 years old and under. So from newborn to 2 years, because the prophecy was that this was going to be the king of the Jews. This was going to be a ruler in that part of the world. According to Herod did this according to the time which he had diligently inquired from the wise men. So, the Holy Innocents, right? This is in the calendar. This is the 28th of December. Santissimi Innocenti. And later when Joseph comes back, he goes to live in Nazareth. So look in the fact that the privations of little children are an integral part of this Christmas story from the very beginning. And therefore understand, if it's the 7-year-old girl on the U.S.-Mexican border, if it's Kurds that are going to have their lives in danger as a result of this ill-considered abortive, half-baked, half-assed initiative from the current, the reigning Herod in the White House. This is somehow, it's part and parcel. So you got to do what you can. Now let's also just remind people, guides for the year, right? We try to base our policies in the metaphysics of human rights, understood as economic necessities, not things that the tender-hearted can embrace and the cruel can ignore. No, these are economic facts that dictate humanitarian treatment and decent conditions. So what do we have? Well, what are you going to do for human populations? Well, you got your 7 acts of corporal charity, right? Feed the hungry, give drink to the thirsty, clothe the naked, house the homeless. You've already lost most of the Republican Party here. Visit the sick. Yeah, this means more than visit. It means take care of the sick. It means cure the sick. It means biomedical research. It means Obamacare. Don't destroy Obamacare. Visit the sick. Visit prisoners. Well, at least something has been done now. A prison reform opposed by Cotton. And the only reason the Republicans went along with this is that some of their states and so forth say that they're spending too much on prisons. They're not making money the way they wanted to. Well, again, good things done for the wrong reasons. That's often what you can hope for in this world. And bury the dead. But look at those. For the hungry, the thirsty, the naked, the homeless, and cure the sick. Those are the pillars of an economic program. And of course, today, much more complicated. Got to have a worldwide and indeed solar system-wide apparatus of production. Let's also remind, though, there's some other things you can do, and we're sort of intrigued by this, right? That there are also the famous 7 spiritual works of mercy. Admonish the sinner. How about that? Instruct the ignorant. This is what we try to do. Admonish the sinner, instruct the ignorant, counsel the doubtful, bear wrongs patiently. I must confess we're not so good at that. Forgive offenses willingly. And what do we have? I am not able to move the page down, but you get the idea. Let's see if we can find this in another compilation. Pardon offenses and injuries, bear offenses patiently, and pray for the living and the dead. Okay, there we go. So those are the acts of spiritual charity that anybody can do anytime for free. So those are watchwords for 2019. We will have a colossal economic crisis. We're going to have a tremendous political crisis. So it's time to gird yourself with good doctrine for these events. And we wish all of you happy Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, and to others of other faiths. Similarly, among people of goodwill, peace on earth among people of goodwill. And that's the World Crisis Radio for this 21st